Yep, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this HeatSource webinar. We are bang on schedule, but I can see that there are quite a few people just trickling in to arrive, so we'll just give a couple more minutes, or a minute or two for everyone to join us and get settled, and then we'll get started. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started today. First of all, welcome to this HeatSource webinar in partnership with Scottish Enterprise. The topic today is we're going to discuss the recently published energy efficiency market report, as well as covering off the EPC reform consultation from the Scottish Government and tying that into some of the implications for the green heat sector in Scotland. We have a great selection of panellists and contributors today, but I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we have some Q&A throughout the session, and we've got 2 slots for that. If you would like to submit any questions to our panellists, you should see that you should have a control panel with a chat function. Please do feel free at any point to type in your questions, and we will put them to our group today. This session will be recorded and will be available to view on the YouTube channel early next week. We will also be sharing copies of the slides afterwards, so do not please feel the need to furiously take any notes. Again, any comments and questions into the chat box, and your feedback is really appreciated. So there is a short feedback questionnaire at the very end that will be shared. So let me just talk you through today's agenda. So myself, I'll talk very briefly about the HeatSource project that we deliver on behalf of Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise and South of Scotland Enterprise. And then we'll hear from Laurie McElroy, Professor of Architecture at University of Strathclyde, and Damien Roberts, Existing Dwellings Manager from Elmhurst Energy, who will jointly cover off the topic of the Energy Performance Certificate reform. Then we'll have a short time for Q&A because unfortunately Laurie and Damien aren't able to join us for the full session. So if you have your questions related to their presentations in before then, that would be great. And then we'll hear all about the energy efficiency market report, hearing from Margaret Watson from Scottish Enterprise and Sarah Buchanan, Impact Manager at Built Environment Smarter Transformation. And then again, some short time towards the end of the session for Q&A. And just before we get started, we'd like to find out a little bit more about our audience today. We're going to share a couple of poll questions, so they should come up on your screen very shortly. The first one, we'd just like to know what sector you work in from these options. So we have, I think Catherine's going to pop that on the screen there just now. So we'd like to know, fantastic, thank you. So we have, just let us know what sector you're from, that would be great. Whether you're academic, from industry, from the public sector, or other. Just another few seconds on that, if you don't mind capturing your contributions, that's really great. And then next up, it would just be great to know if you have been to any of our HeatSource events in the past, or if this is your first time joining us. Again, just a quick yes or no on that one. It's always great to see which topics you start to bring in new audiences for us, and really helps us design effective and engaging content for our webinars in the future. Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much for all your contributions to that. So I will go ahead and start our session. So a little bit about HeatSource. So like I said, this is activity that we deliver on behalf of Scotland's economic development agencies, trying to understand how we can take advantage of the opportunities that are presented by the transition to a greener heating sector in Scotland, whether that's through strengthening supply chains, understanding policy, or supply chain challenges, skills gaps and future workforce concerns. We want to be a place to bring together ways and opportunities for people to network, to share those stories, to give insights into what is working on the ground and what may not be working, build collaborations and build networks so that we can signpost to some of that good news and signpost all of the great case studies and good activity that's happening in Scotland and take advantage of that. HeatSource is here to support all organisations and individuals across the supply chain, like I say, from manufacturing right through to installation. If you or your organisation would like to schedule a one-to-one with one of our team to understand your ambitions and your activity and how you see your organisation growing or taking advantage of some of the kind of support landscape products and organisations that are out there, please do get in touch with us at HeatSource at be-st.build and someone from the team will be in touch with you. You can also keep in touch with us and check out all of the kind of reports, case studies and other resources at heatsource.org. If you'd like to sign up to our newsletter, hopefully most of you are already, we do run multiple events throughout the year, webinars and in-person events, again, trying to provide lots of opportunities for networking. You can sign up to our newsletter. All of these links will be in the chat as well. As well as that, Scottish Enterprise have a really active green heat team, and you can sign up using that link and a link in the chat box to make sure that you're the first to hear about funding products or other support activities that are relevant to the green heat sector. Finally, I just want to draw your attention to the Scottish Industry Directory for Green Heat. By clicking on that link or the link that's in the chat after the webinar, you can go and see a huge list of organisations based in Scotland right across different areas of expertise and activity. If you have an organisation that qualifies as a Scottish Green Heat company, you can find out how you could get your organisation listed there by hitting the Contact Us button on that particular page. So that's enough from me as host today. Next up, we're going to hear on Energy Performance Certificate Reform from both Laurie McElroy and Damien Roberts. So Laurie, if I could invite you to share your slides and pop your camera on, I will disappear for a little bit and I'll be back for the Q&A. Thank you.
Hi Laurie, that's great. We can see your screen.
Okay, you can see everything.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, thanks for the introduction, Emma, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to speak a wee bit about the EPC process itself and the tools that underpin that, but I will speak mainly about the history of the current consultation and how we are, why we are where we are with that. Moving on, I'll just do it manually. Okay, so to set a wee bit of context, back in 2015, Scottish ministers designated energy efficiency as a national infrastructure priority. And since then, the Scottish Government has continued to support energy efficiency through a number of routes, while at the same time developing policy for the delivery of energy efficient Scotland. And this includes using EPCs as an indicator of energy efficiency in both domestic and non-domestic buildings. However, although energy performance certificates are generally accepted as being suitable for comparing the relative performance of one building with another, The system was never really designed to support the delivery of net zero emissions buildings, because other than theoretically, it's very unlikely, based on the current system of assessment, that an A-rated house or building, for example, will come close to delivering what's required in practice. But nevertheless, the Scottish Government decided to stick with the EPC, not at least because it was well known and understood, but also because it's committed to improving and building on the current EPC assessment process rather than accepting it as it is. However, as EPCs are owned and developed by the UK Government, there have until now been restrictions on how far Scottish Government could go with this. Based on the domestic programme alone, there's a lot of work to be done on our existing buildings to reach government targets by 2045. And if done right, all of this work could support the Scottish economy, and over the lifetime of the Energy Efficient Scotland programme, around £10 to £12 billion will be invested in energy efficiency. Not all of it by government, I have to add. And this investment will help to create a substantial Scottish market and supply chain for energy efficient services and technologies. For every £100 million spent on energy efficiency improvements, it's estimated to support around 1,200 full-time equivalent jobs across the Scottish economy. But while it's fine for the Scottish Government to set a route map, as shown on this slide, to meet net zero by 2045 based on energy performance certificates, that alone will not deliver against the government's objectives. Now, the SAP tool, the Standard Assessment Procedure, on which EPCs are based, is by its very nature a one-size-fits-all approach. It takes absolutely no account of location in the country, the climate in different places or weather differences. It uses what they call steady state calculations, which means it takes no account of the thermal capacity of buildings, actual occupancy or behaviour, or how energy is used in a building. Nor does it take account of how that energy is produced and delivered, and the list goes on of all the things it doesn't do. It also struggles to keep pace with the potential benefits of new and innovative technologies, partly because there's a time lag between new technologies emerging and them being included in the calculation processes, and partly because the emissions associated with these technologies vary depending on fuel mixes in different parts of the country. Because as we all know, for example, much more of our electricity that's produced in Scotland is produced from greener sources than it is in other parts of the country. And while there are many people dedicated to the upkeep and refreshing of the calculation methods, both for domestic and non-domestic buildings, and the EPCs, and these people are attempting to address all of these challenges, it has to be accepted that it will never be possible to time release tools, to time tool releases with the latest innovations or changes in policy at a governmental level. However, there are significant developments taking place to address this, and some of these are the subject of the current consultation on energy performance certification reform, and others, such as the development of a new and more dynamic or flexible version of the SAP calculation method, SAP 11, could transform the EPC process, and the Scottish Government has got its eye on all of this. The assessment used to produce an energy performance certificate collects only basic information about a building. This includes the floor area and construction type, and details about the heating, lighting and ventilation systems, all based on a visual and non-intrusive survey. The approach also uses assumptions based on the age and characteristics of the building, although if evidence is available, this can be used instead of default values. But even when it is available, this is not always done by assessors. It really depends on the assessor and their experience. The aim of the whole process is to compare the building being assessed with other similar buildings, with calculations being based on standard patterns of occupancy and use. And this means that the running cost figures don't relate to the real occupants' lifestyles. In fact, the outcomes would be, or the outputs would be the same, whether or not the building was occupied. The EPC also suggests improvement measures and displays ratings that could be achieved if these were installed. Again, these are based on logic set out in the methodology, and they don't really account for site-specific issues, such as whether or not it's possible to install the measure on the building, or whether another measure might work better for the occupants, or if it makes any sense whatsoever to install, whether it makes sense to install a particular technology, or whether they would need special planning permission to do that. And in terms of presentation, there are also issues. The top image on this slide shows the energy efficiency rating, but this is actually a cost-based figure, not an energy rating at all. And this affects how low carbon technologies like heat pumps are reflected in the calculation method, because heat pumps run on electricity, which is lower in emissions than gas, but higher in cost per unit. So installing a heat pump will not necessarily improve the EPC rating. That depends on other improvements to the building. And the lower image shows something that's called the energy impact rating, environmental impact rating, which is arguably more useful. But I'll leave the specifics of these for Damien to talk about later. All I need to say here is that all of this underpins why the Scottish Government is consulting on EPC reform. So going way back to January 2017, the Scottish Government then published a series of consultations to inform its policy decisions on the overall design and operation of Energy Efficient Scotland, which was previously called Scotland's Energy Efficiency Programme. During pre-consultation workshops for these, stakeholders raised a range of issues and challenges, including their concerns around the application, limitations and quality of EPC-based building assessments for broader purposes such as setting standards. It was agreed that a thorough assessment of the issues raised around EPCs was needed to ensure that these issues were investigated, responded to, and where appropriate, addressed through further review. So following these three consultations, in December 2017, the Scottish Government commissioned a strategic examination of energy performance certificates and their underlying calculation methodologies to support the development of the Energy Efficient Scotland programme. And this was done by taking a two-pronged approach. Firstly, they commissioned research to review the whole calculation process. The research recommended making changes to the methodology as well as the information presented on and the design of EPCs. I won't speak about this in detail, but the research highlighted that broadly, while there are legitimate criticisms of the software, some of these relate more to the fact that it's now being used in a way that was never intended, and other criticisms were less well-founded and related to hearsay, misconceptions and myths. And quite often the tool was found to be much more flexible than people actually thought it was. Following this, in 2019, the Scottish Government ran a short life working group on looking at the assessment process itself. And this reviewed the assessment processes for both domestic and non-domestic buildings with a view to tailoring the outputs from the calculation methods and the recommendations to support consumers in making decisions about the relative value of building improvements in the context of their household and occupancy patterns, for example. And both of these pieces of work fed into a consultation in 2021, which was delayed because of COVID. But the 2021 consultation focused on the introduction of a specific EPC metric based on energy use into the domestic EPCs, and to rename the existing metrics to make them make more sense and actually reflect what they meant. The intention was that this would support delivery of the heat and building strategy. Following feedback from this consultation and further policy development, the Scottish Government put forward a modified set of metrics to maximise the value of EPCs. And this included a fabric-focused metric that would be more appropriate to support policies intended to drive fabric improvement. Essentially, the main idea was to introduce a new metric of energy efficiency based on the amount of energy used by the dwelling, in other words, an energy use rating, to sit alongside the current energy efficiency rating, which would be more appropriately named as an energy cost rating because it didn't actually reflect energy in the first place. It was also proposed to retain and rename the environmental impact rating as a carbon emission rating in line with recommendations from the Short Life Working Group. The Scottish Government also proposed changes to the way that information is presented on the EPC. Respondents to the consultation broadly agreed with these proposals, but stressed the need for EPCs to provide clear, simple and useful information to users. Respondents also noted the need for issues to be addressed in the underlying methodologies. In both the 2021 consultation and wider engagement, stakeholders expressed concerns that EPCs and therefore the policies that rely on them are inherently flawed because they are based on model data. Stakeholders were particularly concerned with assessments of existing buildings where three issues were identified. Firstly, they saw a risk that EPC assessments misidentify the type or characteristics of building elements, because if something is, for example, covered in rough cast, then it's very difficult to see what's underneath that without doing some kind of intrusive survey. And so mistakes can be made either just as genuine mistakes or by the use of default values or by methodological constraints. Secondly, the model might overestimate or underestimate values such as heat demand or running costs. And particularly this has been found in domestic properties where the tool tends to underestimate the energy consumption of new properties and overestimate the energy consumption of older properties. And this potentially misleads consumers who interpret the values shown on the EPC as a prediction of actual energy user costs. And finally, the recommendations shown on an EPC might be misleading. For example, they may not be physically possible due to data input errors, or may have inaccurate cost analysis, or may be technically inappropriate for the building without further investigation. And all of this feedback was taken into account when developing the proposals presented in the current 2023 consultation. So why do we need another consultation, and why should you respond to this? Well, in February 2023, the UK's Climate Change Committee published research and recommendations that were very much in line with a lot of the previous Scottish Government research. And this recommended that EPCs are reformed to ensure they better reflect our net zero objectives. The recommendations from the Climate Change Committee for domestic properties said that they should include 4 primary metrics using real-world units and clear, simple names as shown here on this slide. And a key recommendation was that EPCs should encourage a holistic approach to energy efficiency and support the use of low-carbon heating solutions. Now that this is happening at a UK level, the Scottish Government is taking the opportunity to use the Climate Change Committee's recommendations to bring together a range of policy areas around energy and heat in buildings, and is consulting on the range of metrics listed here and more for both domestic and non-domestic buildings, including reflecting the importance of zero direct emission heating. And they also propose to do the following, and that would include clarifying the purpose of EPCs, reducing the validity period of an EPC from 10 to 5 years, modernising the Scottish EPC format, and moving to a more web-based solution with links to signpost for further advice, expanding the sharing of non-personal EPC data so that the EPC can be more useful as a resource, and improving auditing of EPCs with a risk-based smart auditing approach. And finally, updating the operating requirements for approved organisations for actually carrying out EPC assessments. And this is my final slide, just to point you to the consultation itself. It closes on the 16th of October, so there's not much time to respond, but it's really something worth doing, and I hope that this has spurred you on to do that. Thanks very much.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Laurie. Yeah, we've popped that link to the consultation where you can read it and also respond to it in the chat box, so everyone will be able to do that. If you just take your camera off, Laurie, that's fantastic, and pop yourself on mute. And next up, we'll hear from Damien.
If you just want to pop your camera on, Damien.
Will do.
Yeah, we can see your presentation, no problem. Are you able to put on your webcam okay?
Yeah, I'm doing that now. Bear with me.
Perfect.
Sorry.
No problem. That's great. Thanks, Damien.
Should be it. Hopefully everyone can see me.
Can
Is that
see you
okay?
now. That's great. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Great stuff. No problem. So yeah, thank you for inviting me to this webinar. It's a real pleasure to come and speak to you about the EPC and the Scottish reform. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Damien Roberts. I'm the Existing Dwellings Technical Manager at Elmhurst Energy. So for those of you that don't know who Elmhurst Energy are, we're an approved organisation for energy assessors. So the people that are out there creating your EPCs on properties and non-domestic buildings as well. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the EPC, as Laurie has mentioned, about the costs and everything. I'm going to cover a little bit about that. So it adds a little bit of context to why the consultation is in place and why we need a reform of the EPC. In summary, so there is 3 key points to the consultation. The first one being to introduce a new set of metrics, as already has been discussed by Laurie, for the domestic EPC. The second point was to introduce a new set of metrics for the non-domestic EPC, and there were additional points looking at the way the EPC is made public to people, so changing that to a web-based format, and also looking at how the audit system is in place. For this particular session, appreciate that can't go through everything, so I'm pretty much just going to concentrate on the first key point, really, about the importance of those metrics for domestic properties. So the EPC itself has 2 headline ratings at the moment, and those are titled Energy Efficiency Rating and the Environmental Impact Rating. So and the energy efficiency rating, it can be misleading, or it is misleading. I think, like Laurie said, it is based on a cost based rating. So it's not actually based on efficiency, although there are elements of efficiency in it, which I'll cover later on the slide, but generally it is based on cost factors. And those cost factors don't change very often. So move on to this slide. So these are the cost factors. So and it's based around a methodology called SAP. SAP is the standard assessment procedure, for those who don't know what it is, and derived from that is something called RDSAP, which is for existing dwellings, which is my involvement really. And but they use, so the 2 methodologies together use the same fuel prices that are set in SAP itself, and these are in a table called Table 12. For those of you that are interested, and those only change when a methodology change happens. So we currently use SAP 2012 for RDSAP, purposes. Now, I know that might be a little bit confusing for people, because SAP on construction area EPCs, they are currently on SAP 10.2, so it can be a little bit confusing, but RDSAP currently is basing its algorithms and fuel cost factors on SAP 2012, and this is to give you an indication of what would happen when we have the next update to the RDSAP methodology, which is coming hopefully sort of the beginning of next year. So these cost factors, as you can see, at the moment, it is the, bear with me 1 second. So it is the orange bars that are SAP 2012 fuel prices, and it's the blue bars that are the new fuel prices in SAP 10. So you can see the difference on what would happen. Currently, if you had mains gas for heating your property, then it would assume that you are on 3.48 pence per kilowatt hour. Moving that to SAP 10 would mean that that goes up slightly to 3.64. Now, we know that that isn't a true reflection of what is going on out in the real world, but that is based on calculations done by the BRE. But if you look at electric, which I think is probably the one that is piquing people's interest at the moment, so that will go up significantly if and when we adopt these fuel prices. So that is what your energy efficiency rating is based on. These fuel costs are what drive that factor. So you can see that if you had a mains gas heating system, your rating would probably be relatively good because it's cost factor. So the cost for that fuel is particularly low. Whereas if you had standard electricity, for example, then the rating on your EPC would be significantly lower because of the high cost factor that you can see there. So, and to give you a little bit of indication on what that would look like moving into adopt the SAP 10 fuel prices for us in existing dwellings for RDSAP world EPCs, then if you had a property, standard property, and your EPC rating as it stands now, for argument's sake, is an E50, then you would, moving on to the new fuel prices, you would, using mains gas, for example, you would end up with a 1 point increase. So you, how you are now would be 50, and then you would go up to 51. So still within the same band, but you go up by 1 point. The negative impact, obviously, as I've kind of illustrated on the previous slide, but this kind of brings it home a little bit really, is that the cost of electricity going up means that if you were on 50 now, E50 now, you would go down to an F37. So that's quite significant. That has quite far-reaching implications across the whole of the UK, really. There are many factors like policies that governments are implementing. For example, in England and Wales, we have the minimum energy efficiency standards, and that requires for a property to be rented out, you would need to reach at least an E rating. So it can have those kind of implications. So going from an E to an F is quite significant. On the flip side of that, though, the environmental impact rating would prove to be better. So if you had an EPC, again, we'll stick with the 50, so E50, you're at mains gas, so you're going to go up by 3 points, so that would go up to 53, still staying in the same band, but you can see actually the significance of a better environmental impact. So it's saying that when we move to SAP 10 for RDSAP, then the environmental impact is going to get much better. So you would go up by around about 34 points. So you're going to get to a B rating. So for environmental impact. So it is quite significant that all of those fuel prices are for the the energy rating will rise, but your environmental impact will fall. So the proposals for the new metrics then. So as Laurie was mentioning, so you have fabric rating, cost rating, heating system type, and there are what they're classing in the consultation as potential secondary metrics, which is your emissions rating, which I've just sort of gone through, and the energy indicator, which is effectively what is energy used, which actually isn't a part of the EPC at the moment. So I'll cover these in a little bit more detail, but we currently have the cost rating anyway, which is incorrectly titled as energy efficiency rating. So that will be tidied up potentially and be shown as a clear cost rating. And the emissions rating will stay the same, but will be a secondary metric. But then, so potentially you're going to have 3 new ones. So the fabric rating, the heating system type, and the energy indicator, which is energy used. So the fabric rating, again, there are what is proposed is 2 different ways of delivering this rating. And it is, so basically what they are saying is the energy required to be supplied by the heating system to achieve standard internal conditions, including heating, cooling, and domestic hot water. So that's one, and the flip side of that, so the second option to achieve the fabric rating is the same again, but to remove the hot water part of that equation. The reason being for that, and I think this is the preferred method, is that the hot water, it potentially can be changed, say on a semi-regular basis. So the lifespan of your heating and hot water system is probably around about 10 years. So whereas something like if you were to install insulation in the walls and the roof, then that would have a longer lifespan. So there is a significant impact on the way the hot water would emit heat. So the thinking is to remove that sort of scenario and go for just heating and cooling as an option to get to your fabric rating. So what we would prefer the fabric rating to be based on is something called heat transfer coefficient. So what that is the it's the way in which the heat flows through the property envelope, where internal and external temperatures are different. So, and potentially that can be measured. It's not a part of the EPC, but it is an assumption. The HTC figure is an assumption, and Elmhurst would like to see that makes sense, that would be the fabric rating. And now I say it can be measured. It wouldn't be a part of the EPC at this stage. That's not part of the consultation to include the measurement of HTC. But there are mechanisms out there to be able to measure it and get a true reflection. So ideally, what we would like to see is that you have your baseline EPC with this fabric rating on it, and then homeowners could get another sort of report done where a measurement has taken place, and then people would know what the performance gap is. So your fabric assumption is this, and then your actual fabric rating it has been measured and it's this, and then you can see what the performance gap is. And we feel that that is a better approach. But I'll move on to heating systems rating. So that's probably the next significant metric to be introduced. And the proposal would be to obviously really focus on zero direct emissions heating systems. So giving you an indication of what the efficiency is of that particular heating system in that home at the time. So if you consider the likes of heat pumps, for example, so currently they have an assumption figure within the methodologies, and that gives 170% efficiency rating for a heat pump. So if the assessor, as has been described, going around to the property, collects all of the relevant information and identifies a heat pump, they don't know what type of heat pump it is, but they're going to use a generic option, which is possible in the methodology. And using that generic option would then mean that they would gain that 170% efficiency. But that can be improved significantly if the assessor can identify the make and model, and then use the heating systems database, which is a feature within the software that all approved organisations would have. And if by using that, they can improve that efficiency up to anything above 350%. So that would have quite a significant difference, as I was saying before, on the cost rating. Because if you're using electricity, but you have a heating system which is highly efficient, then that cost rating would come down, because your heating system isn't using the amount of kilowatts it would, pence per kilowatts it would normally. So it makes sense to have something on the EPC which identifies what type of heating system is present and the efficiency. I just wanted to show everybody that Elmhurst have thought about this as well, and it's not a sales pitch. It's just showing that this is what we think an EPC could potentially look like, and this is our what we refer to as an energy report, and we already have your energy efficiency rating, yes, that's cost, your emissions rating as the headline metrics, but then we also have some additional ratings where we have primary energy, which is already on the EPC, we've got energy used, we've got the carbon tonnage, we've got the actual cost, so in terms of pounds and pence, and then we've got that fabric rating, which I've just described as HTC. And we feel that that would be lots of relevant information for policies to use, like, so if people wanting to focus on fuel poverty or reducing their emissions or just making their home more comfortable to live in, then those are the things that as a baseline start, homeowners and stakeholders would generally need. The validity period, I'm just going to touch on very briefly because I feel like it is significant. The validity period of an EPC at the moment for any EPC is 10 years. And we've long campaigned for that to be changed. And it is welcome news that in the consultation, Scottish Government are suggesting to reduce that to 5 years. We ideally, what we would like to see is 3-year lifespan. But if the property has gone through a material change, so had a new heat pump installed, then we feel that that should have a new EPC. It should be made a requirement for any material change. So that's just our view, but I feel like it is significant to mention it because having an EPC that is 10 years old and then using it for a policy and that may not be a reflection of what that property is like now. That property could have undergone significant changes, had extensions, etc. So ideally, it should be on material changes to a property where an EPC is required. And I hope that was informative. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Damien. That's excellent. Thank you. It was really great insights. If I could invite Laurie, if you want to turn your mic and your camera back on. We've got about 10 minutes for a Q&A on that. So there's been a couple of questions from the audience and a couple of kind of generic ones and some more technical ones. If we don't get around to all of them, please don't be disheartened from the audience. We will get responses from Damien and Laurie and others afterwards, and share the answers to all of the questions that are put to us. So first one is hopefully quite an easy one. Is there any indication of the time scale for the implementation of the EPC reform following the consultation? Or maybe it's not so easy.
We're both laughing and looking at each other.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Laurie? I
don't mind. You go.
Okay. There is no real indication. There is a question within the consultation, and ideally, I think what we would like to see is something to coincide with the current changes that are going to take place for the new methodology of RDSAP. Obviously, that's quite soon, so it may not be a realistic goal, but maybe it could come in line with RDSAP 10 is what we're referring to it as, or SAP 11. Ideally, sooner the better.
Yeah, that's what we all want. But
the consultation closes on the 16th of October. Generally speaking, it takes about 6 months to get anything out in terms of a report on that, and changes will take place following that. So my guess is back end of 2024, but start of 2025. But I think the key thing here is that everything is moving in the right direction, and that I think one of the frustrations the Scottish Government had was that they weren't able to push for certain things on the basis that they weren't happening at a UK level, and the Climate Change Committee report has now put everyone on the same page, because the same thing is happening in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, to move all of this forward together. So at least we won't be running two sort of parallel or diverging, in fact, approaches to this. So that's really important.
Yeah, no, I think that probably answers another question in terms of, this is a Scottish Government consultation that's open, seeking feedback about how reforms might be implemented here and what that would mean. But, a lot of the organisations that are hopefully making up part of our audience are active both north and south of the border, and that level playing field, that increased understanding and standardisation of approaches and stuff, I think is really key for the sector in terms of making investments in either products or services going forward. So yeah, it's really reassuring to hear that there is a little bit of a shift towards a more kind of coordinated approach.
Sorry for interrupting. I think what's always been a problem or always not been a problem in the past, but something that we've always had to bear in mind, is the fact that companies do work on both sides of the border, and therefore there has to be consistency. And so that some of the differences between an EPC north and south of the border were purely presentational, and that may continue, but the underlying methods and the calculations will be the same, never mind where you are.
Brilliant. Yeah, excellent. A question here that I think might be more for you, Damien. Okay. What's the sort of implications on these kind of SAP changes and EPC reforms on the kind of skills and training side for assessors and for people in industry?
I don't know if there is any significance for training. Really, it is more to gain understanding of what the EPC is trying to tell you now. So I'm assuming that we're probably talking about the cost factors that I was talking about earlier, the significance of those. Like I said, it is if you think now you're at a particular rating, should those, I didn't mention it in my slides, but those cost factors out of SAP may not be a part of RDSAP. RDSAP may carry its own cost factors. So we don't know what that looks like yet. But so if we're using those cost factors out of SAP, though, you will see it is quite significant, the rating changes that you could see by having an EPC now, like I say, rated at 50. You have this implementation takes place tomorrow, for argument's sake. You then have a new EPC done the next day. Your rating would have dropped, and you know the implications of that are, if you're a landlord in England and Wales, you may not be able to rent the property out because of means purposes and things like that. So,
yeah,
I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, no, I think I think it's just about that kind of that shared understanding and just thinking about some of those kind of wider implications, not just for organisations, but like say for homeowners and landlords and others going forward, which maybe brings me on to another question. So obviously this EPC reform potentially has the opportunity to like you say, change from one day to the next what someone's or a property's rating is. There's quite a lot of other policies and documents and regulations and guidelines out there, and networks that are talking about, you know, ISH2 and EPC ratings and things like that, and the targets. You know, does this reform, you know, lead on to, you know, multiple other, you know, reforms of policies and guidelines, or is it just that changing the EPC rating or methodology, and therefore the rating will just then skyrocket the number of challenging properties? You know, if that EPC rating comes down, there's more properties at a lower level, therefore a bigger mountain to climb to get them to the right rating. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a
bit of that. Damien might be better placed to talk about this because it's more related to RDSAP. But yeah, I mean, that is a potential problem, and especially when EPC is used as the metric and the driver for all of this. I don't know what you want to add to that, Damien.
I think so. Our view would be that that introducing different metrics is great, and they should have been introduced a long time ago across the whole of the UK. And if you're thinking about a particular policy, so I believe that and we have had some conversations with Scottish Government, but I think we believe that at that stage, then they can focus on a particular metric. You don't have to focus on the whole of the EPC. It's one part of it. So which metric are you looking at? So if you're looking at reducing fuel poverty for people in Scotland, then you're looking at the cost-based metric. That's already on there, we know, but it's not particularly clear, and that's one of the things that we're pleased to see that will be tidied up. But then, yeah, you can focus on any particular metric then. If you're introducing your fabric rating, so then you can focus on making the homes more comfortable, having insulation installed, etc. So I think that's the thing that that we've wanted for quite a long time. It's don't focus on the whole of the EPC. It's you need to focus on the individual parts and the particular metric.
Yeah, and there's nothing to say that the government can't change its. I mean, the route map that I showed on my slide is really old and it's not been updated. And I didn't go into it in detail, but some of the dates on that have changed for different, whether it's owner occupied or private rented sector. Some of the dates on it have changed over time, partly because of things not moving quickly enough and partly because of the changes that are taking place here. So as Damien says, there's nothing to stop them changing the way in which the EPC informs policy, and it won't be such a blunt instrument. I mean, there's also a question in here, I think it was from Alex, about the plan to continue using energy costs and CO2 figures from 10 years ago. The idea now is to be much more flexible and to keep costs much more up to date. And I think in RDSAP the costs are going to be much more flexible and much more easy to update, because there's a separation between the costs and the tool. It's coming up, isn't that true?
That's right. Yeah. Hopefully we can be a little bit more fleet of foot then. So yeah, it'd be more relative to what's going on in the real world.
Well, with time for just one more quick question. I think you mentioned with the heat system rating reform that operatives will be able to look at the the heat system database, which will have those kind of figures to be able to, for specific manufacturers and products. Yep. How would an organisation make sure that their most innovative products can be added to that? So we've had a couple of questions from manufacturers of more innovative, like direct electric heating products, or how does that stay up to date with the kind of best on the market?
Yeah, so that is so it's the PCDB, the Product Characteristic Database. So if you had a look online, that's publicly available, and anybody can identify heating systems in there, and it houses lots of different information as well. But that is effectively run by BRE, Building Research Establishment, and to get a new heating system or whatever it is, a new form of heating control onto the PCDB, manufacturers need to approach BRE. BRE will then do some testing on the appliance, so sort of testing the relative emissions on what they're claiming they are, and things like that. So making sure that the responsiveness is what it says that it is by the manufacturer. And there is a charge for that, and I won't go into the details of that, but there is a charge that BRE applied to that process for testing. And if it all matches up, then it gets added to the PCDB, and then approved organisations like ourselves then have the ability to have that in our software. We call it the PCDF. It's like a file out of the PCDB. That's where we gain all of the heating systems, and then from there the assessor can select the relative one. So.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much for that. Hopefully that's given those of you with innovative products or products that are not currently maybe fairly looked at through the SAP process, the EPC process, to find a route forward for that. We do have a few other questions, but I think we've come to the end for this Q&A. I'd like to thank very much Damien and Laurie, both of you, for your time and for your insights on there. That was really, really insightful, and thank you. I will be in touch with some of those other questions if we can get some answers to that over the next couple of days, and we'll share them with the audience. Thank you. You're free to go. Thanks very much, everyone. So for our audience, please do stick around. We're moving on to the next part of our webinar. If you bear with me, I'll just share my screen. So we have we're moving on to the Energy Efficiency Market Report. Let me just check that we're seeing the right screen. Catherine, can you just confirm that that's all good?
Yeah, Emma, that's perfect.
Fantastic, excellent. Yes, so next up, we're going to spend the next 25 minutes hearing from Margaret Watson, the Low Carbon Transition Team at Scottish Enterprise, and Sarah Buchanan, Impact Manager in the Retrofit Team at Built Environment Smarter Transformation, discussing the Energy Efficiency Market Report. If I can invite Margaret, if you would like to come on and give your short introduction to the green heat sector activity at Scottish Enterprise.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. Really enjoyed those two presentations from Damien and Laurie, and I think they're very informative and insightful for us all. I just wanted to take a quick opportunity to alert participants on the webinar of the Green Heat Innovation Support Programme that's being administered by Scottish Enterprise currently It covers, like HeatSource, it covers both the High area and South of Scotland enterprise as well, and is being undertaken on behalf of the Scottish Government. It is a £17.5 million programme aimed at supporting businesses across all things relating to heat. So it's not just heat pumps and installations, it's also covering off energy efficiency measures, products, processes, technologies. As you'll see on the screen, I'm not going to go through it all because the slide will be available as part of the pack that comes out of the webinar, but it's made up of a combination of both individual calls and always on support, as we call it, so something that's there all the time. So if you see something on there that you think is of interest to you, or your business or organisation thinks that they have a project that would be appropriate, please do get in touch. And Emma also mentioned previously all the ways of making contact with both HeatSource and Scottish Enterprise. So recognising the critical role that energy efficiency obviously plays in the decarbonisation of all of our buildings, it became apparent that there wasn't a great source of information that brought together all the great work that's currently being undertaken and what that work can actually mean in terms of contributing to the Scottish economy, which is obviously Scottish Enterprise's focus. So to that end, through an open tendering process, BEST were commissioned on our behalf to undertake a report bringing all that information together, and that report has been shared currently with partners, primarily in the public sector, who've brought some funding towards it, and they seem to think that it's it's going to be a very useful piece of work for everybody interested in the energy efficiency area. So hopefully some of you may have been involved in the consultation that was undertaken as part of that work, and so be keen and interested to learn what Sarah's going to tell us about. There's obviously a huge amount of pioneering and valuable work underway across Scotland, and this work, the report, brings together all that knowledge and expertise that's being built up to share it with all the different elements of the supply chain, from assessors to installers to financing to all the things, all the different elements that's involved in a retrofit project, from the energy efficiency to the heating system, etc. So I know we're pressed for time, and Sarah's got a huge amount of information to share with us. So I'll hand over to Sarah, who led on this piece of work on behalf of BEST, and with a limited time available, I'm sure she's going to be keen to share with us and happy to take some questions. Over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me along. I'm going to speak about the Energy Efficiency Market and Economic Opportunity Analysis Report. I'm the Impact Manager for Retrofit, and I'm just going to share my screen, and then I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take some questions. So I'm trying to condense a 6-month piece of work into 20 minutes-ish, and a huge amount of data and information which is contained in the report. So I'm giving you the high level, most interesting bits. I encourage you to read the report in its entirety. It's about 15,000 words, and a lot of work and blood, sweat and tears went into it. So I hope you enjoy this brief overview. So we undertook the report, and while you're understanding the report itself, we have to understand the structure of the retrofit market, and that includes regulations, standards, funding, EPC regulations and targets, the size of the market opportunity, mapping out specific supply chains within the report, and quantifying demand, investment and the potential for the market opportunity, as well as the different considerations for the different sectors. So we looked at domestic and non-domestic with a focus on public sector domestic. And we looked at some of the solutions, the barriers and solutions to really delivering scale within the retrofit market. There was 4 of us that worked on it. I led on it, reviewed lots of research reports and tried to condense it all We did a survey to about 500 people and got a response of 124. All of this is contained, really rich intelligence in the report. It's all contained in the appendices. And we did lots of interviews with 38 stakeholder interviews as part of this report. So a lot of the comments and a lot of the detail, some really good comments from the interviewees is all contained within the report. So the state of play in Scotland, what is the size of the market? We've got about 2.6 approximately domestic buildings. There's different drivers for each ownership group. So you've got about 70% is owner occupied, about 23% is social housing, and the remainder is the private rented sector. There are different drivers, different funding mechanisms and skills requirements for each of those groups. And within the non-domestic market, you've got about 220,000 public sector buildings. We focused on the 23,000 public sector estate. There's funding in place for that through the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and we looked at some of the procurement spend, and it's massive, huge opportunities. One of the challenges we have, there is no universal definition of an energy efficient retrofit currently that is mandated by either Scottish or UK government. Building standards are doing a lot of work around this to set out energy performance standards for existing buildings. And we have a rich quality of industry-led standards, but these are not widely adopted yet. And that's one of the things that we really need to unlock to drive the market forward. And of course, we've heard enough about EPCs today. Obviously, they're under consultation. There are regulation pathways that are set out in the heat and buildings strategy. However, if we have a lot of changes coming to EPCs, I imagine that those regulation pathways will be affected by what the EPC, the new EP system might look like. So we have detailed regulation pathways out in the report based on what's on the heat and buildings. They may change depending on the consultation that's out currently. So we looked at standards, we looked at course of PAS 2035. I'll give you a brief explanation of what that is, the funding pathways for both domestic and non-domestic, regulation and skills. Skills was the #1 barrier to delivering retrofit. The numbers are huge in what we need to deliver. That came out of the interviews, it came out of the survey. A guaranteed pipeline for these projects, because that will encourage the investment by the supply chain and skills. Of course, we know this. We need to stop these short-term funding pathways. We need longer-term funding. And the kind of service innovation was identified through the report. So there are currently 3 standards that you can adopt if you're undertaking non-domestic retrofit. One is the LETI Climate Emergency Guidance. It sets out performance standards that you can work to a whole house fabric first retrofit. And it sets out space heating demand targets, air tightness, the level of moisture control, ventilation strategies, considering everything on a step-by-step pathway. You can also look to the Enerfit standard, which is the passive house version for a retrofit project. Again, really stringent quality, reducing the performance gap. There's a really interesting case study from Nidri Road, which is the 6 tenements buildings that Southside Housing, CCG, a number of the universities, University of Glasgow, University of Strathclyde, worked on. The cost for that, it costs more to deliver these types of standards. That needs to be looked at in terms of investment pathways. However, the benefits are outstanding. The current tenants are paying £40 a month for their bills, which is just a huge saving at the moment. If you think that's already a third more expensive than what it would be if we weren't in a cost of living crisis, then it's massive savings, massive positive deliveries for fuel poverty. The AECB retrofit standard is another industry-led guidance that is slightly less onerous in terms of performance standards, and lots of social housing, private rented sector are looking at the AECB retrofit standards, and that's all detailed in the report. Of course, PAS 2035 is the process by which you undertake a step-by-step domestic retrofit project. It is linked to all UK funded Eco4, any type of energy efficiency funding pathways. Scotland currently, some funds follow PAS 2035 principles and don't have to follow the full certification process, but there's obviously massive opportunities in terms of training the supply chain base, the installer base in the installer version, which is 2030, PAS 2030, which is what the accreditation system for the installer base. And again, it creates an entirely new skills sector. Retrofit assessors, so domestic energy assessors could upskill to become retrofit assessors, retrofit designers, and people who then go in and evaluate the projects once they're undertaken. And again, this is just to give you a flavour of the opportunities that are available in the market. This is not widespread. We need a lot of support in terms of the PAS 2035 quality and certification processes. The supply chain needs to be helped and developed with PAS 2035. Again, it's all detailed in the report. So the funding pathways for retrofit for both domestic and non-domestic can be quite complex. I am retrofitting my house, and it's taken me about 9 months to get to the point at which I am ready to apply for one of the grants, and that has been through engaging with Home Energy Scotland, who I have to say have been really good, but it takes a while. It's quite complicated. You need to figure out what measures as an owner-occupier that you're entitled to. There's lots of different funding pathways if it's a social housing provider, and again, the funding pathways need to be extended. We're still kind of working in these 1 to 2 year funding pathways. They need to be extended from 3 to 5 if we really want to drive the retrofit market. Area-based schemes are a way for local authorities and areas of fuel poverty to really access funding. Eco4 can be used in conjunction with area-based schemes, and of course we've got the Warm Homes Scotland programme, which has just been delivered by Warmworks Scotland. So there's lots of different ways that you can access funding, but that kind of ability to cut through the maze of funding and the maze of how to apply for it, that is something that we have identified in the report that needs to be looked at. For example, there's a really interesting model in Ireland, the one-stop shop, where you go to them, they'll tell you what grant funding you need, they'll provide the installer base, they'll provide the retrofit assessment, and they'll provide the quality assurance after it. Home Energy Scotland is amazing, Energy Savings Trust is really good, but we don't have one place where you can get everything. That's kind of the missing link. These pathways, as I've said, link to the EPC consultation. This is what's been set out in the heat building strategy, which was published in 21. So these will have changed and shifted slightly, and unfortunately the announcements this week from UK government have meant that the private rented sector in England will have different regulation pathways for minimum EPCs than Scotland. But as it stands, their private rented sector have minimum targets before they can sell or rent their property, which will be in place by 2025 with a backstop of 2028. That is the current pathway. But lots of work to be done around the owner-occupier sector and setting out minimum EPCs. The consultation hasn't begun for that yet. But again, to drive that 70% of the market, we need the regulation to be brought in order to drive the requirements. Non-domestic buildings, there's no current minimum EPC set for non-domestic buildings. It's a far more complicated task because of the different uses within non-domestic. Industrial almost sits as a kind of separate part of the market, but there is work getting done through Scottish Government with the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, and this will look at the kind of pathway to the public sector are going to deliver their backstop for decarbonisation of the public sector portfolio is 2038, and so it will be the public sector that will drive this movement in the non-domestic, because that's already been set out in the heat and building strategy. Skills. So the reason I came to work for BEST is because I've been having conversations about skill shortages for the last 20 years. That is no different for the retrofit market. There are huge skills shortages in terms of the number of people that we need to deliver the targets that have been set out by the heat and building strategy, and also to upskill the people who are currently in the industry as well. There's lots of crossover between, an installation installer isn't an apprenticeship on its own. It's a mix of different types of apprenticeships. It's a mix of different skill sets. There's a whole piece that we're working on with the colleges sector. But there's 3 different sources that we cite in the report. But essentially, wherever you look, the numbers are Scottish CITV are putting the numbers at 22,500 additional people just for energy efficiency in the market by 2028. That's a huge ask, both for skills and trainings providers, the current college base, and there's lots of really exciting innovation getting done around in-house skills and training. But yeah, that's one of the major things we need to look at. For those of you on the call who are from industry who want to know where the opportunities are in terms of public sector and the decarbonisation scheme, we detail out what are the top technologies that have been funded, and we also look at the procurement. So what is the spend from public sector procurement in all of these areas, and it's millions of pounds. You can see it detailed out here across a number of the public sector procurement. This is 2022. 2021 is also detailed. It increases year on year. So if you're making a business plan about why you should be looking at energy efficiency retrofit as a market, it's absolutely massive. The numbers are huge. But it's about that consistency of pipeline, that consistency of a guaranteed number of houses. We need to get to 1 million by 2030, and currently we're delivering 3,500 a year. So that's a huge, huge gap that we need to solve with people. Yeah, and then we moved on to market demand. This is a really quite an interesting, difficult part of the project, I would say. There's not a lot of data out there on individual measures, and so I went back to a BASE project, which we adjusted for inflation, to look at the different types of wall insulation, windows and doors, and then mapped that for inflation. And then we mapped it against a cost model based on a low, a medium and a high retrofit. Now, these numbers do not include heat pumps. That wasn't a focus of the report, but if you're working in the green heat sector, it gives you an idea of the cost of investment, the cost of the opportunity for those properties which are going to be coming online to be you know, the next step in energy efficiency is obviously looking at your heating system, and particularly when the EPC system is sorted, then that will become even more of a way to get a higher EPC certificate. So we then took these figures and mapped them against the data contained in the Scottish Housing Condition Survey, looking at the number of properties under the current EPC system which are sitting below a C. That is the minimum energy, current minimum energy efficiency, which is being looked at in the heat and building strategy. So if we look at the numbers, they are, you know, they're massive. Even at the low end of the scale, using that average model, just for owner-occupier sector, 21 billion. The private rented sector, 4.5 billion at the high end of the scale. This is just for energy efficiency. And private rented sector, 5 billion. So between 4.8 and 30 billion is what we have estimated that this market could be worth. So if you're looking at reasons why to invest or why to get involved, it's huge. And that, again, that doesn't include the numbers for looking at heating and looking at heat pumps, etc. So I'm really just whizzing through this because of time. Sorry, I'm just going to sort my slides out. So I wanted to include the slide about the Enerfit, which shows you the difference in cost. So where we've detailed out, it's been between 4 and 25,000 for the average energy efficiency retrofit. If you're looking at an Enerfit standard, the costs are much higher. This is borne out by the Nidgy Road example and is included as a case study. But what you do get is that humongous reduction in bills. Enerfit also looks at embodied carbon within the products and services. So it's just to say that the costs are higher, depending on what standard that you want to work to, and that's something that needs to be delivered through policy. We then went on to supply chain mapping, and if you're working on a retrofit project, you can look at smart meters, ventilation, surveying, draft proofing, insulation, renewables, smart controls. And so we had to take a sample of the supply chains and the products and services we were going to look at, and we did that by looking at the ones that we felt were the biggest opportunity for reshoring within Scotland. So we looked at the windows, natural insulation and digital services. So the windows fenestration industry is really quite fragmented in Scotland in terms of before the research that we did, we thought it was, well, you know, people make windows and we can work with them to innovate around manufacturing. And but actually the way that the market works is there are 12 to 15 larger companies that produce the actual window frames. Then there's a smaller subsector of fabricators, and then we have the installer base. And actually to be able to innovate and provide new products and services, for example, triple glazed windows, it's a case of bringing all of those sectors of the market together, and it's detailed much further in the report. And we also detail the supply chains that are in the report. But if we're looking at innovation within the windows sector, then you're really looking at embodied carbon, reducing U values, making sure that that kind of mid-base of the SMEs is looking at manufacturing processes. How do we get them to make Passive House certified products, for example? It doesn't need to be Passive House, it could be another low energy standard. And so, yeah, there's a lot of early stage collaboration that is required in the industry. If we really want to push forward that kind of low carbon design, we need to bring people together, and that's detailed in the recommendations. We also looked at the insulation market, so that's a huge opportunity. The predominant insulation product at the moment is synthetic insulation, and so how do we kind of shift that embodied carbon? You know, there's massive savings on embodied carbon if we looked at national insulation. Scotland has a lot of the raw material supply chain here. There are structural barriers to being able to have other examples like Indie Nature, Superglass, other companies in Scotland. There's a load of research, interesting research getting done around wood fibre, clay, cork, mushrooms. So how do we build that market to take advantage of those spends? If we're looking at the energy efficiency, what can we do to really encourage the manufacturing base around natural insulation? And also the certification and warranties. There's a number of research outcomes that we found around the infrastructure of being able to certify products. Actually, there's not a lot of testing houses in Scotland. How can we make sure that the government invests in the kind of testing of products infrastructure in Scotland? And finally, we looked at digital. So we cannot deliver the scale of retrofit that we have to deliver if we don't make it easier for people to survey houses, to use digital platforms and technology, to make modelling easier. And there's a number of really interesting, really innovative Scottish companies examples. Hero and Snug are two of the two that we looked at in the report. We need to do more. There's a lot in terms of the social housing sector, or if you have a large stock portfolio, there's not so much, nearly so much for the private kind of owner-occupier sector. We need that kind of one trusted source of information that will also recommend, you know, installers and contractors, and that's some of the things that we uncovered in the report. And then we looked at barriers. You know, there's a lot of the public aren't aware that this energy efficiency, you know, making your house more energy efficient, we like to think if we work in the industry that people are aware of this, but there's still a lot of work to be done around the general public to drive the demand. We need to stop doing single retrofits like I'm doing. We need to do large scale retrofit, going into a neighbourhood, looking at the social housing, the private rented sector and the owner occupied sector, and financing that to go in and do like an entire area. That will then encourage the supply chain to know that there's this guaranteed pipeline, which will then you know, fuel the investment in skills. There's a lot of interesting discussion around the curriculum, around building physics, understanding thermal modelling, moisture movement, ventilation strategies. That needs to be taught at a much earlier level. We also looked at the investment for the supply chain base around PAS 2030. That should say PAS 2035. And of course, we have rising costs, material costs in construction at the moment. How do we square that off with we're in a cost of living crisis? You know, people don't have that amount of money to spend on their houses. Where can we bring costs down? Where are the efficiencies? And we do a lot of work around skills and training at best. Yeah, so some of the solutions, I'm just really conscious of time because we're getting really close and I want to try and answer some questions, but it's all detailed in the report. It's a fantastic piece of work, if I do say so myself. Lots of interesting solutions, suggestions around green finance options, research and development programmes, Retrofit intermediaries, which is a real movement of people teaching each other. I'm a member of one, it's fantastic. Lots of local authorities looking at the retrofit market. And finally, next steps, we detail, I think, around 36 recommendations within the report. How can we work with supply chain, products, suppliers, innovators? How are we going to deliver the scale that we need to, and not just wait for policy to catch up? So hopefully I've left enough time for a couple of questions. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was excellent. Again, if I can just ask Margaret if you want to pop your mic and your camera back on. Yeah, we do have about 5 minutes left for questions, and we do have a couple in here. So one that is a good one. It says, you know, thinking about this skills shortage in Scotland, but Ireland was mentioned, sorry, as a kind of a good model on that kind of one-stop shop. Have they managed to overcome some of their kind of skills challenges over there, and can we look to them for more than just a good model on a one-stop shop, but also kind of skills activities as well?
Yeah, so they've set up, I think there's 12 now. There's 12 skills hubs purely dedicated to skills and trainings, and they've got retrofit rigs. They've got different typologies of different wall build-ups. They've got they use a different certification program, but whatever the name, the name of it escapes me, but whatever it's called, there's 12 of these little skills and training hubs dotted all over Ireland. So they have taken the skills element to the person. It's a lot more rural, obviously, as you can imagine, and we are trying to copy some of the learnings from the Irish model. They've done really, really well with it. They did have a lot of funding from Europe, but yeah.
Fantastic, excellent. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's part of what we want to do is raise awareness of what's happening elsewhere in terms of that best practice and good practice, and then learn from that and implement it in Scotland. Maybe a question for you, Margaret. The report, when is that likely to be available? And is it something that we could share a link to following the webinar?
Yeah, it'll be available and shared with everybody that's on the webinar today. What we didn't want to do was put it out and then distract people from coming on the webinar and not having read the report. But yeah, it'll be widely available and certainly circulated to everybody after this.
Fantastic, that's excellent. Yeah, so hopefully everyone on the audience, you'll have a chance to dive a little bit deeper, but Sarah's done a sterling job there of kind of summarising that kind of key findings. Let's just see if there's a couple here there. There were some specific questions about kind of regional variations on the kind of cost model. I think it's indicated there that there's a potential lack of data on that. Is that something part of the recommendations, I'm sure, on future research?
Yeah, so essentially, because of COVID, the publicly available housing data goes back to 2021. And we didn't have the granular, we don't have access to home analytics, which is the actual granular detail. I tried to get access, however, because of the local heat and energy efficiency strategies, the people who have access to that, plus we didn't have a data sharing agreement in place, they were snowed. And so one of the recommendations is if you want more granular data on geographical locations, then that has to be done by the people with the access to the data, and we didn't have it in time. So I used publicly available data, but because of COVID, that's not been published since 2021. So, and it uses aggregated data as well. So I'm using aggregated. If we want the real geographical split, then the people with access, who have access to Home Analytics, Energy Savings Trust and others, they would need to do the real drilling down. Yeah, that was one of the things that I had raised.
Fantastic. And Margaret, is that something that in terms of kind of future research that the Green Heat team and Scottish Enterprise or others might be looking at supporting?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, this was a first sort of stab at, it was almost, we didn't know what we didn't know before we started doing this. And as Sarah knows, there is just a huge amount of information out there that she has spent a huge amount of time pulling all together. So the next stage is for us to look at, well, what do we need to delve into further and deeper, and then potentially be whether that's bringing organisations, businesses together to work more collaboratively around one sort of specific area, or doing more research to dig into understanding things more in more detail. So yeah, this is the beginning of probably an awful lot more work, and working with like the National Retrofit Hub to understand what the Scottish opportunity is, as well as the UK-wide opportunity, and what's quite unique for Scotland and where we can have an impact on that.
Excellent. So we've literally got a minute left on the webinar, and I'm conscious not to keep anybody back from the rest of their afternoon. I'd just like to finish up by saying thank you to all of our contributors today, Laurie and Damien from earlier, Sarah and Margaret for the EPC, energy efficiency report insights. Like we said, there's plenty of links in the chat box. If you've not managed to capture them, they will be shared in any post-event email alongside the recording and alongside the energy efficiency market report. Please do join us for future events. Again, there's another wee link in there about what's coming up from BEST, Scottish Enterprise, and from HeatSource. And yeah, we'll see you again shortly. Thanks very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.